Hey, everybody, welcome to the Triple B Experience podcast. I am Gary D. This man right here is Cable, aka Caleb Thomas. How's it going, Cable?
Not bad. How about you?
Good, man. It's been a busy week, but I am glad to, spend the middle of my week with you and the real life living Incredible Hulk ourself, Mr. Triple B.
Well, I try to be incredible. And God bless you too. And yes, this is probably the best thing about the whole week is this interview tonight. Like I am seriously excited. Like I am, because being a lover of comic books and love of art, this is surreal for me. And this gentleman that we have has done something that is truly remarkable. And let's just bring him on right now. Mav, how about you introducing him, because I'm too excited.
Well, you sure are.
I am.
He's so excited that he forgot he forgot the fact that I didn't even say we had a guest tonight, but we do. Thanks for saying that. Well, first, this is what I'm going to do. We have a guest tonight, so we're just going to skip the banter like we normally do, because as always, we've got shit to say, right? That's our saying. So we're going to bring him in. We have comic artist, and Marvel artist, Jim Rugg with us tonight. So Jim, welcome.
Hey guys, great to be here.
It's awesome to have you on the show today. We are honored, and you've made Bubba's life. So
yeah, usually Jim, I'm real hyper, but I just it's so overwhelming because right here, I have it, I've read it. It's something that I truly treasure in this character. And I know when we talked at down in Pittsburgh when I met you, it was an honor to meet you, and this is great work, just super great work.
It's so nice to hear, Bubba, because I always say like the real Hulk fans are the ones that make me nervous about the book, because I don't know if I did things wrong, if I didn't do, if I don't do the Hulk justice, those are the people that are going to know it. So I'm glad that you approve.
Oh, it took me back to when I was reading the books when I was a kid, like the whole, you took it up to issue 300 and you did some stuff, and it's just truly took me back to my childhood. I know we're going to
get into that.
I'm calming down. I didn't have an energy drink. I have no coffee.
He's always so hyper. No
I'm very hyper.
Yeah. He's ecstatic tonight. But Jim, there's nobody better to introduce you than you. So why don't you just give us a little introduction about yourself for anybody that's listening that might not know you?
Well, I've been making comics for about 20 years. I've done a lot of creator-owned comics like Street Angel at Image Comics, Aphrodisiac at House Books, The Plain Janes at DC Comics, and then Little Brown, possibly the first American young adult graphic novel, The Plain Janes. And I also do a YouTube channel called Cartoonist Kayfabe with fellow Pittsburgh cartoonist Ed Piskor, who has also done a grand design for Marvel Comics. He did X-Men. He got the grand design thing rolling. And as you guys have mentioned already, my latest book, Hulk Grand Design from Marvel Comics, basically retelling the 60-year history of the Incredible Hulk in a couple of oversized or double-sized issues that you're holding up right now.
That's great.
Oh, I bought 3 of them that day.
I love it.
Yeah, no, it's been awesome. I have a 3-year-old son who's been enjoying it it's been his bedtime story for about a week now. So he is enjoying it also. But anyway, we like to start off with an icebreaker for everybody. And I swear on this, it's usually a random, I just pull randomly. I have a Miro board with a bunch of them and I pull them randomly. But this one is really fitting. So let's just get loosened up here. Your icebreaker question is, what superhero would you be and why? Oddly enough.
It would definitely be the Hulk. I've had a short temper my entire life. I used to be teased by my family when I was a little kid about it. So I identify with the Hulk pretty closely in that.
Wow. Okay. You seem such like a laid back, cool comic collector. I would have never imagined the Hulk.
I've mellowed as I've gotten older.
Okay.
So growing up your entire life, the Hulk was your number one character to go to no matter what.
Yeah, I'm not sure it ever wavered. I was a Hulk fan before I started even reading Hulk comic books. I saw the Hulk TV show when I was a little kid. That was still on. Loved that. I had like some Hulk like glasses and a bowl that I used to eat cereal out of whenever I was going to first grade. You know, every morning that's what I'd have my breakfast. And so like I fell in love with this character because like a lot of kids, I loved monsters, and he was just this monster. And then I realized he was a comic book character, and was the first comic book that I would buy was the Hulk.
Nice.
And like I say, you know, it's always been my favorite of the Marvel characters, even before I was a Marvel Comics fan.
That's amazing. My next question was like, what was your first memory of comics? You know, and well, you just stated that. So the Hulk. Wow. Okay, that's great. So whenever you got the opportunity to do this, this wasn't just say, hey, you know, Marvel, like, here, go do the Hulk. Like you had a choice of what you like. How did that work?
You know, I don't remember exactly if Marvel had come to me for a proposal or if Ed was like, hey, you know, if you have a proposal, I'll send it, give it to my editor. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but I know there were several of us, including Tom Scioli, another Pittsburgh cartoonist who did Fantastic Four grand design. And we basically all prepped proposals for our favorite characters. And fortunately, that they didn't overlap. You know, Tom and I weren't fighting over the Hulk. Clearly, Fantastic Four was his first choice, like Hulk was my first choice. And so I just put together a proposal. You know, I often call this a dream project for me, but that's how it started. You know, it was if I could do anything at Marvel, what would it be? And it would definitely be a Hulk book. So being able to do like the Hulk book, you know, telling his whole history, it's kind of the perfect project for me as a longtime fan.
I never realized that there were so many great Pittsburgh comic artists. Like it's baffling. So that's amazing. Did the Grand Design start? Was the first one with the X-Men that
Yes.
Ed did? Okay, that was the first one. Okay, so was that something that like Ed came up with? Like, let's just do a whole, you know, the backstory of all the comics. Like, how did that work?
Yeah, and you know, I don't want to speak for him totally, so this is me paraphrasing. You know, anybody that's listening or watching. But he had posted you know, we all grew up X-Men fans too. That was the number one book when most of us were at that prime reading age,
Right.
during Chris Claremont's run. And Ed was like the rest of us in that regard. So he had done a history of hip hop family tree comics. And towards the end of that run, he did this like a fan art piece of X-Men. And it was all the different X-Men teams. You know, they've gone through all these different iterations over the years. He did this really cool piece that had like 4 tiers, almost like the X-Men Grand Design comic, and each tier was a different team, and posted it on Instagram or Facebook or somewhere. And the response was really strong to it. And his idea from the beginning was, you know, there's almost one coherent story there, probably because Chris Claremont wrote it for 15 years. And his idea was to like go through those comics and tell that as like a coherent single story. And, you know, that's the grand design in the title, is the idea that like all of these comics, decades of comics, basically tell this one giant story, this epic story. And I think because of the social media response, Marvel's editors noticed and were like, okay, you know, this is a proven cartoonist. He has an audience. He likes X-Men. Let's talk to him. And so I think that was Ed's pitch, was this idea of telling like this grand story, the X-Men story as one big epic rather than, you know, 20 years or 30 years of individual comic books, but make it one big story, almost like a biography or something. You know, he had done the hip hop family tree, which was very much almost like journalism, going through, you know, nonfiction history and researching those stories. These comics are kind of similar, you know, like when I approached Hulk, in my mind, it was almost like a biography of this character, and the comic books were a big source of the information of, you know, what is this?
Jim, did you go back and read all your Hulk to get all this source material?
I read all my Hulk. I borrowed stuff from other people. I read reprints. I read some digital. But yes, I read all of them up till the end of the first volume of the Hulk. After that, it was kind of spotty here and there. You know, I do reference some stories that take place after that. But in terms of reading, like that first run of Incredible Hulk, around 500 issues, I read all of those many, many times.
I feel you. I feel you. I did too. But also too, with your grand design, you actually incorporated the Lou Ferrigno in one page, which was phenomenal. You know what I mean? Like, so you actually incorporated what you saw when you were a kid in the book. So I thought that was something. I didn't think that was coming when I read it, but it was, and I like the TV show too. And I'm a big Hulk TV show. I'm a big Hulk guy, even though he doesn't get his just due in the movies, and we won't discuss that. But
we could discuss it for a minute. You know,
we could, we can.
Here's my theory on that. One of the reasons I was excited to do the Hulk is I think the Hulk's different than all the other Marvel superheroes or all the other superheroes, period, because he's not a superhero. And I think that's why they've struggled to make a movie with him, because they figured out how to do superhero movies, but the Hulk's not a superhero. He doesn't fit into that mold. And I think if that's the template you're using, it's never going to work right with the Hulk.
Okay, that's a good way of. I never thought of it like that.
It's tough to make a superhero movie about a character, for the most part, that doesn't want to indulge in his powers.
That's a really good point. I never thought about that.
Me neither.
He's a monster. They need to make the Hulk as a monster movie.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
I had this question planned for later, but while we're on the topic, I'll put you on the spot. Eric Bana, Edward Norton, or Mark Ruffalo?
Gosh.
Way to go, Cable.
Bill Bixby in that list.
I was going to, but I just went with the movies. But go ahead if you want to throw him in there.
I would rank them as probably Mark Ruffalo, Ed Norton, Eric Bana, and nothing against Eric Bana. He's as good as the others, probably. You know, I don't think one of them stands out more than the others, but Mark Ruffalo, I like him as an actor, so I'll go with him.
Do you think, Jim, if Ed would have been able to do the Hulk that he wanted to do, he'd have been in he wanted to do a different approach and they wouldn't let him do it? That's why he didn't do it. He'd have been the number one, because I think Ed Norton is the best. But
I can see that. You know, I think of him as like in Primal Fear or something, like his ability to kind of play two different characters, two different personalities, probably would lend itself to the Hulk. So, yeah, perhaps if he was allowed to do what he wanted, he could have done a really killer Hulk.
That's a very good point. I never even thought about that, because he did play two characters in that movie. But for me, I don't know. My Bruce Banner doesn't do parkour in Spain. Like I agree with you. Mark Ruffalo, I think, nails the professor, scientist angle of Bruce Banner. So I agree with you there.
As a Hulk connoisseur,
melancholy better than the other two actors, also, or at least the way they're portrayed in the movies. And I think that melancholy is an important part of Banner's characterization. Well,
if we see him turn in the movies later on, turn to the dark side, which I hope he goes to, then we'll see how he will be able to act that way. But I don't know if they'll do that, if they pull the trigger on that, which I hope they do. But out of everybody, when Jim, who was the best Hulk artist when you were growing up reading, and what Hulk story comes to the forefront when you're reading the Hulk as the best Hulk that you have read in your time?
Man, I started reading, and it was the end of Jeff Purvis, who was doing Mr. Fix-It, and I loved Mr. Fix-It version of Hulk.
Gotcha.
And I think Purvis is really good with that character. Del Keown comes on shortly after that, and he was like my main guy when I was buying the Hulk monthly, and he's a great Hulk artist. So that's probably my guy. But when I went back through and read everything, I was thinking Herb Trimpe. You know, like Herb Trimpe was the guy in my back issues that I would always think about. But whenever I went back through the series and read them all, Sal Buscema really stood out to me. Like, does a great Hulk. A Hulk. I think his Hulk might be wider than he is tall, which makes him a very powerful looking monster.
Right.
And one of my favorite issues, I think it's number 272. It's whenever Hulk teams up with Sasquatch to fight Wendigo, which again, it's monsters and, you know, the snow, the Canadian Rockies.
Yes.
And it's one of the early intelligent Hulks, which is pretty, you know, like scary. Like Sasquatch is even like, man, he seems to like this violence way too much. So that's probably one of my favorite Hulk stories. As a longtime reader, it was one I read as a kid. I don't know how I got hold of that old issue. And then I kind of lost it or didn't think about it for years. And when I tracked it down as an adult, it was totally different than I remembered it, which was kind of a fun surprise. But it still remains one of my favorite issues, kind of a standalone issue. And again, just monsters fighting each other.
Well, that storyline wasn't very long because he got amnesty, and then Nightmare messed him up, and then we went to the Then we went, got banished to the Crossroads, and I believe the Crossroads storyline was actually very tremendous because there was no dialogue.
It's also where they start to plant ideas that Peter David would get into, with like Banner being abused as a child and the different Hulk personalities within him. up to that point, like the Hulk character doesn't really change much. You get a glimpse of him being intelligent near the end of the 200s, but really it's like Monster of the Month Club. And, it's just Green Hulk smashing somebody, whoever crosses his
Yeah.
path. Around 300, around that Crossroads storyline, they start to get into some different directions with the Hulk, which makes for a good split in terms of my 2 books that I'm doing. But it's a really interesting, like, Bill Mantlo, I give him a lot of credit for figuring out some different directions to go with the Hulk there.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, I think you might be onto something. I think you need to maybe go into movie like script writing as well, because honestly, you could be onto something here. I never thought about making it more of a monster movie than necessarily a superhero movie. That's that really.
He was always misunderstood anyway, Mav, and he was never going to get his just due, and he never got his just due in Marvel Comics. Even when the storyline that Jim's talking about, where he got to be smart and not Professor Hulk, just smart. He got amnesty, and then all of a sudden he was loved, and the Avengers loved him, and all of a sudden people were spying on him, and it was going in his psyche, and then Nightmare got a hold of it, and that's what took him, and he went into New York, because he always rampaged in New York many, many times over, like he, which, New York didn't build up its defenses, but then he just went into the Crossroads. So, I mean, there's a lot of good stories that I'm coming into now, but I think the greatest story, which was a whole thing, was have you read The Immortal, Jim? Have you done The Immortal Hulk? Have you read that?
I have not.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. I've heard nothing but good things about it, and it's on my to-read list.
Okay.
I did not want to read it while I was doing the book. I was kind of afraid from what I was hearing about it that it would influence what I was going to do.
It might have. Because it was more of a monster stuff. And it was from one to, it was a whole story. It wasn't split. It was a whole story the whole way through. It's a very good read.
I'm looking forward to. I've done this before. Whenever I did Street Angel at first, everybody was like, "Oh, you should read Tank Girl," and it was like, "Oh, I don't want to do that while I'm working on the book." And then I read it after I finished the first volume of Street Angel, and I just fell in love with Jamie Hewlett's comics, with Tank Girl, and it's become a big influence on me. So it was probably good to push it off until I wasn't doing a book like that. And I feel like Immortal Hulk might be the same thing.
Is that what you do? I'm sorry, Matt.
No, go ahead.
Is that what you do when you do projects and you don't want to read anything or look at anything similar because you don't want it to interfere with the project that you're doing in the comic world?
Yeah. And I mean, it's tough because if you read something and fall in love with it, it's hard for it not to find its way onto the page. And, that's the worst thing to do, would be like a pale imitation of Immortal Hulk or a pale imitation of Tank Girl. So it's best to just I'll get to it one of these days, it goes off into my future to read list and gives me something to look forward to.
It's good. It's good. You will definitely like it. It's enjoyable.
So all 3 grand designs were done by Pittsburgh artists.
Yes.
Okay. Are you still from the Pittsburgh area? You're still around?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, all 3 of us often get together to do Cartoonist Kayfabe. Tom's not there every week, but we're all friends. We got to know each other because we would travel to comic book shows together. And, is when we were starting out, it was great because we would get together like once a week and we'd bring whatever we were working on. And it was almost like positive peer pressure. You didn't want to show up without new pages. So, it was a way to kind of push each other too. And, we've just all kept with it and stuck with it. And so over the years, our projects kind of ebb and flow, but we've done quite a bit now.
Awesome.
It's been almost 20 years now that we've known each other.
Yeah, that show on YouTube is very good. I've watched it. I subscribe to it. It's very good. It's a lot of in-depth comic stuff that if you don't know, you'll know once you've watched your show, and I appreciate that. So,
and is it still daily? Is it?
It is. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we went daily whenever whenever the lockdown started. It was kind of like, what can we do to
Isn't that hard? Isn't that hard to do that stuff? Like YouTube and wow, I commend you guys.
But daily though, coming up with content. But I mean, I guess there's no shortage of comics, right?
It really isn't, and we try to from the very beginning, our thing was there's so much negativity and online and on social media. And I'm sure you guys see it. People would much rather trash whatever comic than talk about the one they like.
Yeah.
We just thought there's a place for the other direction to kind of showcase the books we like. Because I always think we're in a golden age of comics now, between reprints and imports and new talent and web comics and just create our own books. It's like there's so much good comics, And I get it. There's anytime you look at anything, 90% of it's not going to be good. That's just the way the world works. But the flip side is there's so many people making comics, like even the 10% that are good, it's more than I can read in a lifetime. So I don't think you're ever going to run out of content for the show. Yeah. And it's kind of fun, you know, like I know like Ed sometimes will bring up some book that I'm not familiar with, or maybe I've heard of it, but never read it before. So it's a chance for me to see some new stuff also. And really just a chance to hang out with your buddies and talk about comics you like.
Nothing wrong.
That's awesome.
Yeah. That's why we do this podcast.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So
okay.
Ed,
So
go ahead, Cable.
Oh, well, I was just going to go back. Now, you said you were a fan of Hulk from way back before you even were into comics. When did comics make an impression in your life? When did you start reading them or get an interest?
I started reading them in the late 80s. I got a paper route when I was 10 years old. And so I had a little disposable income. And my parents didn't like comics. They thought comics were for like little kids. But once I had some of my own money, that's what I did. I started buying comics because I always liked to draw. And I would draw like movie characters, or I would draw like wrestlers. And once I started buying comics, like the first
wait, what did you say again? Say that one more time.
I would draw movie characters and wrestlers.
Wrestlers.
That's right. Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior.
Yeah. Oh, you're speaking our language now again.
So, besides the comics,
did we just become best friends?
Yes. So you're also
part of the Triple B experience now.
That's right.
Hey, God bless you. You can come on anytime. So you're a wrestling fan too.
That's
I know the kayfabe, but when you started, wow.
Let him finish his story.
I know.
You can go back to wrestling in a second.
No. I just think that's awesome about your love stuff is incorporated in everything you do.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I can get back to the wrestling and how it connects to my comics. But yeah, I started reading in the late 80s, and it was a great time. Jim Shooter had just left comics, and he's known for having very rigid storytelling rules. Even drawing a few comics to kind of show his artists like what to do, like what he was expecting. Once he leaves, it kind of goes the other way. You go from like very controlled to kind of like anything goes. And that's when the Image guys flourished. Todd McFarlane becomes huge, Jim Lee, Rob Liefeld. These guys become massive in the late 80s and early 90s. And I mean, it was exciting. As a fan who liked to draw, those were the guys I was copying drawings from, like in my notebooks in school and stuff. And, sales were big. Wizard magazine pops up around that time. There was just a real energy of like, comics are cool. Rob Liefeld was like 20 or something and driving sports cars. And, it was just this really exciting piece, as well as, the comics themselves that were fun. It was also like a sense of like comics were kind of cool for a change. And, that was exciting as a fan and as somebody that wanted to grow up and make comics. I would read like anything I could find about how to make comics. And there wasn't much, it might be like some guy drawing a newspaper comic in a neighboring town. I'd see an interview and I'd just pore over it to try to figure out like, what's the secret? How do I do it? And so like when a magazine like Wizard shows up and you would see like a penciled page, it was like, my mind's blown. Like, this is what it looks like. This is what I should be drawing like. And, that just kind of like fueled my desire to make comics. And that's, I never really wavered from that.
That's awesome.
Only job you ever wanted?
Yep.
Yeah. That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Not many people get to say that, Jim.
No,
I mean, I'm sure you realize that, but that is special. That is awesome.
It is. And I say it all the time. Like when I meet people and they're like, wait, you do what? It's like, yeah, it's a dream job. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing you do now is
I do illustration, like things that are tangential to comics.
Okay.
But
right.
I mean, it's drawing is mainly what I do.
Mm-hmm.
So you were drawing in high school and you took some art classes in school and that formed. And then did you after school? Because I know when I talked to you, you said you went to IUP, which is 5 seconds down the road.
I went to IUP and studied graphic design because I went to school. Like I graduated in 95. And if you guys were reading comics then, like comics had gone from the early 90s of like 8 million copies of X-Men to the late 90s of like, I don't know if we're going to have the lights on next month.
Yeah.
The industry really collapsed in the mid 90s. My taste had changed at that point. Like when Image shows up, they're talking about creator ownership and create your own characters. My dream went from being like, oh, I want to draw Wolverine to being, oh, I want to create my own character and have my own book and, own everything and control everything. So at that point, like I was going in that direction of like indie comics. I got hold of like The Crow when I was in high school and that was super cool. And it just felt like, well, I could just do this myself. And as my taste changed, like I lost interest in a lot of the Image books and a lot of the Marvel books, but I found other things like alternative comics, like Fantagraphics publishes. And I was like, these are cool. Like this is what I want to do. But I didn't think you could make a living doing that. It just seemed like the comics industry was in bad shape. And so I went to school for graphic design, and then I did graphic design for several years after I got out of school, and I would do comics on the side. I'd draw them at lunch. I would draw them in the mornings before work and at night and stuff, and just self-publish them, and I was doing like comic book conventions and just selling my own photocopied comics and getting better. I kept making new comics. And as they got better, then I sent them to a small publisher, and that's how Street Angel started. And that's how DC found me to do the Plain Janes. And I was getting enough work that it was kind of like, I either have to quit my day job and give comics a full-time, try, or stop saying that drawing comics is my dream, if I pass it up. And so that's what I did. And, I've been making comics pretty much full-time ever since.
Wow.
That's awesome. Yeah. Congratulations. Because a lot of people don't make that step. Like that fork in the road you mentioned, some people don't take that, and good for you.
Yeah, and I give my family a lot of credit for that too. They recognized where I was and kind of encouraged me to give it a shot. So,
what did your mom and dad say? Because they didn't like you get into comics when you were a kid, and then you're going to do this for a living.
That was my next question. Yeah.
You know what? They're very happy for me. I don't know if they've read any of my comics.
Oh, wow.
Comics are still pretty weird for them. But, like when I publish a new book or whatever, I'll show it to them and they're like, oh, that's great. And they seem, like I say, very proud of it. But still, I think comics are just a little bit too weird for them.
As long as you're happy, though.
Yeah, and probably until you got to the point where you're actually able to make money off it, they're probably like, okay, yeah, he can do
That's
comics.
True, too. The big thing for them was like, go to college and have something that you can make a living and support yourself with. So that's their main concern.
And you did.
Yeah.
And you did. And this thing is beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
It reminds me a lot of the older style comics that I used to read. Just the illustration. And did you do the writing on this too? I wanted to ask. You did. You did everything. And that's kind of rare for Marvel, right? Like it's usually team approach.
It's very rare. Okay. And it's something the other Grand Designs do. Like Tom and Ed and I, we all come from this indie scene where like we've self-published. We typically write and draw and letter and do everything ourselves. So whenever Ed took on X-Men Grand Design, that was part of the deal. And, these books are different than a regular Marvel comic for that reason, because like you say, most Marvel comics, they're produced by a team. Even if it's the same writer artist, often there's an inker or a colorist or a letterer or somebody different. But with these books, it's just like us. And, and that's kind of cool. It's a chance to see these characters in a way that is really different than your traditional Marvel version of the characters. Like my editor, Will Moss, was very hands off. If I needed something, he was there. Wow. But otherwise, it was like I was turning pages in and he was like, yeah, good. Keep going. We talked about it early on, what I could expect from the editors. And they said, they recognize these books are different. So they were comfortable giving me distance and I kept turning pages in on time. So, if something were really off, I'm sure I would have heard about it, but I don't really do anything that's outside of Hulk continuity. So
this was an editor from Marvel, right, Jim?
Yes.
Is that what you said? Okay. So they basically gave you free reign. Like, here, go ahead, have at it. Do what you want.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm trying to think, like I would turn things in. I would turn in my outline so they saw what I planned to do. And like I said, I don't think I do anything that's not already, a part of Hulk continuity. But they were really good about like letting me work, the way I usually work. And it made for, again, I keep saying dream project, but I mean, it really was, it's the character that I wanted to play with. And
you can't get,
I like to make them.
Cream of the crop. Like, but you guys, all three of you guys are from Pittsburgh and you guys did these grand designs on major characters in Marvel, and you guys are in this location. So now you guys are like the Pittsburgh connection, Western Pennsylvania connection of doing these type of comics. Now, does Marvel say, hey, Jim, can you guys do this? Maybe the Avengers or Spider-Man or something like that. Has that been in the works after the Hulk?
Nobody has said that to me.
Oh, geez. Okay.
And I'm not sure I'd take that on.
Okay.
But I do hope that, I hope Hulk Grand Design sells well enough that they continue the Grand Design projects. Obviously, you mentioned two big ones, Avengers and Spider-Man.
Sorry.
You know, there are a lot of other cartoonists like me, like Tom, like Ed, that write and draw their own stuff and that grew up loving these characters. So, you know, I hope it's something that, based on our success, will continue, you know, to give other cartoonists an opportunity to make some different comics, you know, to play with some of these toys that are corporate owned, but give them a chance to, you know, fulfill those childhood dreams. You know, it's kind of fun to go back and do this thing that I loved as a kid.
Yeah,
Jim,
it's crazy.
When did you start writing this? I'm sorry, I should know that, but
you know what? I'm not positive because I started and stopped and started and stopped.
Well, that was my question. Was it during the pandemic?
It was.
It like, okay. So
I often joke that like I spent the, you know, like when people ask how I make Hulk Grand Design, it was like I took 500 Hulk comics and locked myself in a room for a year. And it's not that far from the truth, you know.
That sounds like Bubba's dream scenario.
Yeah.
But
right.
when you were reading the books, you were jotting stuff down, and when you were reading, was you drawing and getting your setups on how you wanted to do the book when you were reading the comics?
The first thing I did is I read all of them and I made notes on index cards. Like this is my stack of index cards, and I would just write like the issue number, who the Hulk fought, you know, if a new character was introduced or died, you know, if there was a big plot point, so that I just had like access to kind of like Cliff Notes version of everything.
This is awesome. I'm sorry, guys. This is I'm so starstruck because your love of the Hulk is something that, like when I met you, I was starstruck anyway because you're doing something that you love and you're doing a character that I love, and I'm an old man and I seriously appreciate this. I can't wait till the second one comes out. Yeah. So
it'll be out soon.
I know, and I'll buy as many as I need to.
Go buy every variant that, you know, his comic book.
Well, I'm not into variants because I think that was the death of comics when Jim Lee did that, and that just crushed the comic book industry. And I try not to buy different ones, but I do if I like them. You know,
I do love the Wolverine variant though.
It's sweet.
That one's awesome. Yes,
I always have to show off
that's really okay.
Darrow
wow,
that's good too.
Wow, okay,
he's one of my favorite cartoonists, and I've gotten to know him recently. And for this cover, I got to color his pencils, which was just like, you know, dream come true. So
yeah,
I know what you're saying, Bubba, about variant covers, but man,
I
this
know
variant allowed me to work with Jeff.
No, I know because there were so many to choose from, and it's the Hulk. So that's why. I mean, like, yeah. And do you think you could ever do your own Hulk story later on down the road because you love him so much?
I don't know. It's something I would certainly consider. You know, I enjoyed this process, so I'd be down for trying to do more Hulk. You know, there've been so many good Hulk comics in and out of continuity that, like, yeah, I could see that.
Nice. Well, if you
if Marvel came to you and said, "Hey, Jim, we want you to do your own Marvel spinoff," I mean, you'd have to say yes, right?
Probably, yes.
Yes, yeah, you'd have to, right? I mean, you really would. Well, but just going back to my question, what I had earlier, real quick. So, did the pandemic have any, like, was there any issues with doing this during the pandemic? Was
nothing I realized at the time, but since I finished the book, like I'm working on, you know, there'll be like a big book collection eventually. So I've been putting that together and like writing notes for that, and the kind of text piece that I wrote for it talks about Banner being alone. You know, like it's such a tough life for Banner. You know, like being the Hulk has kind of cursed him to be alone. And I realized as I'm writing it, like, oh yeah, this is exactly what the last couple of years have been.
Yeah, right.
That we're all sitting at home alone and stuff. So I think it probably did have an influence. You know, I don't think you can. I don't know how it couldn't influence me. But on a subconscious level, and now I look back and I see things, and it's like, oh yeah, it did. I'm sure. You know, there's a lot of alone time in that comic.
Did it stop production at all?
It did. That's whenever I was saying I wasn't sure when I started writing it, because I started it, and then at some point Marvel, the lockdown happened early in the process, and Marvel told everybody to put their pencils down. You know, comics essentially shut down for a couple of months. Comic stores closed, as you guys probably remember.
Yeah.
And you know, it was the same with freelance. It was like, hold on, you know, stop working. And during that time, I did my first crowdfunder, Octobriana in 1976, the world's first Blacklight comic, was done in that stretch. So it was like I did a little bit of Hulk, then I did Octobriana in 1976, and then I came back to the Hulk.
Which you were the first to, and if you don't know, please explain. I don't know if these two know exactly what you're talking about. You were the first to do that though with the Blacklight comic, right?
Yeah, I have done like screen prints that are with fluorescent ink, which is what creates the blacklight effect. And so I had done these screen prints that looked like old 1970s posters of, topless women with axes and dragons and, shit
nice.
like that. And I really liked it. Like I love color, and those are like the brightest colors I ever worked with. And so I would look at those posters and I thought, like, I think I could do a comic book like this. We would just have to spec out fluorescent ink instead of like the traditional CMYK inks. And I talked to my publisher, Ad House Books, who I've done a lot of books with, and he's like this print guru. So when I have some idea about print, that's the guy I talk to first. And I told him my idea, and he's like, "Yeah, that'll work. I'm confident that'll work, and I'll publish it." And so I was walking around with like, I think I can make a Blacklight comic book. I just need a story. And it took me a while to figure out a story that I thought would be cool. That's what Octobriana became, because it's set in the 70s. And I thought if you do a Blacklight comic, it makes sense that it would be in the 70s.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it kind of grew from there. But it's a fluorescent, it's a comic book, but with fluorescent ink. And it's just the brightest, weirdest kind of comic that I could make.
That's such an awesome idea.
I don't have my hands on that one. I need to, if it's still out there, I need to get it. But
yeah, this is what it looks like. And you
yeah.
Very bright color inks and stuff. And like I said, it was my first crowdfunder. My plan was to make this comic like as a secret and then take it to conventions, because I had a couple of books that were published. And I was going to do a bunch of shows before the pandemic happened. And then whenever everything shut down, I had a book, and it was like, what do I do with this? And so I went to, I ended up kickstarting it. And that was a
one book. It has one issue. That has one issue or two?
It's a standalone issue. Okay. There are some variants for it, but the variants are not just covers. Like I did a black and white version. What happened was, whenever I did the Kickstarter, you need a digital version of a comic if you're going to do a Kickstarter. It's just almost expected. And the fluorescent inks there's not a fluorescent ink, on screen. So I was trying to figure out, how do I make it look good on screen? And I did a version that looked like it was done in the 1970s with like old fashioned style coloring. And then I, in the process of making that, I found like a black and white. Here's the old fashioned style. You can kind of see it's,
oh, wow.
It's like on newsprint.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the process, I saw the black and white art over and over as I was like coloring it and stuff. And I thought, man, I really like black and white comics from the 80s. That's one of the things I collect and I'm into. And because of the crowdfunder, I raised enough money that I could do like a real printed on newsprint black and white version. So that one's Octobriana in 1986, like the black and white explosion. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. And but just one issue, a standalone, self-contained story.
Is that still out there? Like, is it in stores, or was that through Kickstarter only?
It did go through stores, so you may be able to find a copy, in a good shop. I was in a shop in Buffalo last week for a Hulk signing, and they had a couple of issues, a couple of copies.
Oh, that's awesome!
So it's out there.
So when you just said you had a signing in Buffalo, how was the reception to the people that seen your stuff? And was it?
It was awesome. I've done a couple of signings locally. And then this store in Buffalo invited me up, and it was great. Like, all the signings have been amazing. People are really supportive. I've had good turnouts. There are a lot of Hulk fans out there, it turns out.
Good.
So,
that's good.
I think I picked the right character, and it's been good. It's been good to get feedback from people. Like you, Bubba, I've met a lot of longtime Hulk readers, and I say it makes me nervous. Those are the
that's what you said to me. You're like, oh, hey, you're a Hulk fan, old school Hulk fan. You're like, oh, I want to hear from you because people like you make me nervous, because those are the people that truly enjoy it. And I, like I said, and I wrote you, it's thumbs up. Well,
that's what I've been hearing from Hulk fans. So I love hearing that. And, the other thing is, I want people to get it that have never read a Hulk comic. Like, if you're a fan of Hulk in movies, I want this to be your first Hulk comic.
Which would make sense
for new readers or longtime readers. And the response has been good so far.
No, that's awesome. And then the night that Baba met you at the comic book store there, we were waiting to do a podcast. We're like, I wonder where he's at. We're like waiting for him. And then he was so excited. And then we couldn't get to the podcast right away. I think it was delayed, but he was just over the moon. But yeah,
that's how I am.
loves
I'm
it.
like a little kid in a candy store, Jim. I truly doing this podcast. I've met some great people, and like meeting you and having you on our show is I'd have never thought in a million years that I would actually have a man who done a Hulk comic book that I'm actually talking to in my entire life. And I just like I've been saying it numerous times. Like it pinched me. You know what I mean? Like
I love it. You know what? Enthusiasm's my favorite thing. I mean, that's a big ingredient of cartoonist kayfabe for me, because same deal, you know, like I got to meet Jeff Darrow from that. So I love that, you know, like that's a big part of comics. And like, I think of comics and comics history, and fandom is such a big part of it, you know, and I've been on both sides of that table.
right.
So I love it. That means a lot.
Well,
And
to me,
I'm
comic
happy to
books
hear
is
that.
the greatest a form of entertainment, one of the forms of entertainment that I love. And it seems like you love the same stuff that we do anyway, and that's good.
Well,
Yeah.
Bubba, how many comics do you have?
I don't know if I have as many as Jim, but I almost have 10. I have the whole first volume of the Incredible Hulk. I have 102 the whole way up. I have the Immortal. I have Red Hulk. But the only issues I need now to make my complete is 1 through 6, which is going to be very, very hard. I understand that, but that I'll work on that. But I have almost 10,000.
Jim,
That's
what about
amazing.
you?
He forgot more than me.
I actually, I don't know how many I have.
Oh.
I have a lot of piles of comics, as you can see around me.
Well,
I don't know a count. I did this terrible thing in my in the early 2000s where I got rid of over half my collection.
ooh.
I'd been moving a lot, you know, whenever you're like college age and then a year or two out of college, like it seemed like I was moving like every year and carrying around a bunch of long boxes.
Yeah.
I finally had enough and got rid of them. And I've been joking that I've been buying them back ever since. And sometimes literally, you know, like I will find like the same exact copy that I sold, you know, especially if some of the indie stuff in various local stores where I'm literally buying my collection back at this point.
Oh my goodness.
Do you have the app on your phone? You have that app that there's an app on your phone where you can actually comic thing, and then you could put your comics in so it keeps track of what you have and what you need.
That's what I should do, because beside me here are 3 short boxes of doubles. Like whenever I do file my piles of comics away, I find that I have bought some of them more than once.
Well, you know,
So big you don't even know what you have.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah.
I get it.
All right. Well, this is something that I always ask anybody that we have on the show that has a passion for comics. Is there a panel or a splash page or a cover or something that just sticks out to you, whether it was when you were young or recent, that when you just think of comics, it's like all encompassing, and it's that one image that you just go back to in your mind that imprinted on you, you know, to such a point?
Man, that's a good question. And there are a lot of them, Cable. One of them,
I'm sure.
Ronin #1, the cover from Ronin #1, Frank Miller's Ronin, was a huge thing for me, because like when I was a kid, I would buy comics at a flea market. I didn't have a local comic shop, but comics were big enough that I'd go to the flea market and you'd find a bunch of comics. And there was a guy that would sell comics there, and I didn't know anything. You know, like I would just kind of look through and pick whatever I thought looked cool. And I pulled out the Dark Knight Returns original first printings.
Wow.
And he gave me a price of like $112 or something for the set. And I'm like, what? I can't get those. But he gave me Ronin #1 instead for, you know, $1 or $2. And it was Frank Miller. And I went home with it and fell in love. Like it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And I copied like the cover on a poster board, because I don't know if you know that cover, but it's this like fine cross hatching of a warrior standing there with swords. And there must be a million lines on it. As a kid, I loved that kind of line density.
Yeah.
So I copied that cover and really followed Miller around through his career from that point on. So that was a big one, but there are a lot of them. There was one I just picked up recently that was a little bit of a grail for me. It was a Herb Trimpe Fantastic Four Unlimited, I think issue #2. The reason that I've been looking for it for years is I used to go on eBay and just look at original art, like in the early days of eBay. And there was this Herb Trimpe 2-page eBay lot of the Fantastic Four. One page was like the panel gutters made like a big #4. And then, you know, all the spaces around it were panels. Super cool looking. And then the other page was like an overhead shot of Johnny Storm's apartment, where like the rooms were the panels, and you like went down the hallway in the gutter, and like the characters were moving around and talking and stuff. The coolest 2 pages. Like, I was just so impressed by them. I didn't get the original art, which sold pretty cheap. I wish I would have gone after it harder. But I've been kind of looking for that issue. Whenever I come across like a Fantastic Four Unlimited, I'll always flip through it and see if the pages are in there. And I found it like 2 weeks ago.
Nice.
So that one was
That's
really
awesome.
exciting. But I mean, there are tons, like I used to fall in love with a different comic book every week, and I would just pour over those pages. So there have been quite a few over the years that I've been, in love with.
So speaking of that, what about your influences? Name some of your biggest influences. And
Frank Miller was one of the first guys that I recognized and followed. I think the second comic I bought was Wolverine #10, John Buscema with Bill Sienkiewicz finishes, beautiful. And then I got How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, which is a lot of John Buscema art. So
I got that too.
Loved his stuff forever. Went through all the Image guys, liked all of them, loved Eric Larson, got into like indie stuff, was into Stray Bullets, Dave Lapham. And then I kind of fell out of like mainstream comics, and I found Dan Clow's 8-Ball at Fantagraphics. He did Ghost World as one of his comics that came out of 8-Ball. Really like that stuff, but it's a very different style. That's a big influence. And I'm trying to think of more recent stuff.
What style is that, Jim? What
I would say, it's alternative comics. Characters are a little more stiff. Characters are probably a little bit more like caricatures of people. He did stuff in Crack Magazine early in his career to give you an idea of like, I don't know, stylistically, like a little more cartoony, let's say.
Gotcha.
Than, like Alex Ross would be one side of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Miles would be the other side with more of like newspaper comic influences and stuff like that. So honestly, my influences are broad, because like I go through phases. I've been looking at Richard Corbin a lot lately and love his stuff. Mike Mignola was a guy that, I went through. There was a long period where Mike Mignola was my favorite, cartoonist. So, you read comics long enough, you go through kind of everybody.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so much out there. I mean, you like you said, not that you get bored with it, but there's so many different flavors and everything. It's easy to go from one to another and get them all. Obviously, far and away, Hulk's #1. If you had to pick a #2 favorite character property, where are you going?
Actually, give us top 5 if you could.
Given your limited
no pressure.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, I like Hellboy a lot. Specifically Mike Mignola Hellboys. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Yes. Jim, my man.
I always think that would actually be a good grand design, because there's a lot of different sort of takes on them and different creators that worked on them. Savage Dragon was a favorite book of mine for a long time, maybe first 100 issues or so. I loved that book for a long time. And I feel like I'm probably forgetting one that's, great. That's just, there's so many to choose from.
You have a different wide selection.
Eclectic taste.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to narrow it down. I love Preacher. Whenever that was coming out, that was one of my favorites at the time.
That's cool.
So Jim, any of your other work has anybody like contacted you, because now everything that you do as comic book is turns into a Netflix show or anything? Has anybody ever contacted you and said, hey, we might want to do something with your book and maybe put it on the screen, the small screen or the big screen?
Yeah, I've had lots of meetings, and I think everybody that makes comics, like you say, Bubba, everything now is a Netflix show or a movie.
It's all fair game.
It is. So I think anybody that does comics now, especially creator-owned stuff, you're going to have those meetings. But I haven't had anything, nothing serious.
Okay.
Nothing has gone too far. But some interesting meetings over the years.
That's cool. Yeah,
that is awesome. Now I have another question, because I'm full of questions. Now the 3 of you guys in Pittsburgh have done this grand design. Have the 3 of you guys sat down and wanted to do a comic and create your own characters to maybe do more than just one issue? The 3 of you, since you guys are all local and you guys could create something for like maybe a series or a mini series, has that come to the drawing table as of late?
Not really. We have worked in the same rooms together, on our own books. So like a shared studio, we've done that a little bit, and inevitably you sort of talk big ideas and
Okay.
bounce around possibilities. But you make comics like the way we make comics. We're our own boss. We're kind of the creator of that world in a way that I don't know how well we'd get along.
At least you're honest. At least you're honest. Yeah.
Right.
The nice thing with making comics yourself is it's like you really can just take an idea, write, draw, in words and pictures, and try to give that to somebody. And I think it's one of the great strengths of comics is that you can be that close to sort of the original idea or the original person's voice and what they're creating. And working on a team does change that. As you start working on teams, you get more into that realm of television and film, in that anytime you work together, there are compromises. But when you work by yourself, you really can create something that, like, if you didn't do it, it would not exist.
Okay.
Yeah. Especially in a situation like Grand Design where Marvel just gave you the keys. They handed them over and said, here, do what you want. That's pretty special.
And
Definitely.
Which I wouldn't imagine they would do that often, right? Like,
no.
I couldn't see them doing that. So, I mean, that instills a lot of trust into you.
Well, when Jim talked about Shooter back in the day, didn't Jim Shooter give that kid $8 for Venom? Wasn't that the story? Wasn't that the story?
Oh, I know that story.
Yeah, he gave
it was 200. It was 200.
Okay, more than $8.
But yeah,
it was like here's some money. Thanks for the Venom. See you later.
Yeah, and the rest is history.
So yeah, he was pre-business. So
yeah, I've never heard that story before. So it's not David McLeany or Todd McFarlane. It's some random kid.
The idea for Venom was a fan. Yeah, he wrote into Marvel and gave them the idea that the symbiote suit should be its own character, and they gave him like $200.
Yeah, I said $8. I don't know why, but
wow.
Well, I mean, it's not far off.
It's about $8 now. Yeah.
Yeah. But
$200 is long gone, I'm sure.
Yeah. That's when you said Jim, and then Jim was hardcore business. And then an example would be him giving him, here, kid, here's $200, knowing that this character, this creation is going to be massive. And look what happened, years later.
Yeah. And you fast forward to now where it's nurturing almost, or where they tell you, go ahead and make this, let's see what you can do. And that's rare air there. You got to feel pretty happy about that.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's something I would have never expected to happen. If we had all been talking 5 years ago or something, I'd think I'd probably never do a book for Marvel, like really fit into that and the way they make books. So, like I said, I hope that it leads to other cartoonists that work the way I do, having chances to do books with them if they want.
Yeah.
Jim, do you keep up with the movies? Do you keep up with the movies and the shows and all that good stuff?
I don't. I see some of them, but it's pretty random. Like I saw the Spider-Man No Way Home. One Way, some way.
Yeah, No Way Home.
I saw that one randomly because I was visiting friends at a comic book convention at the time that it came out, and the store owner that had brought me there had passes, and so it was like, yeah, okay, I'll go to see that. And I thought it was great. I enjoyed myself very much.
That's awesome.
Kind of random, whatever, the ones that I see and don't see.
So why is that, do you think? It's just you're so indulged with comics that like they just don't interest you, or like
they're a different thing, I used to be much more into movies than I am now, and I can't really explain what changed or why. Maybe life's busier now, and I don't have as much time as I did when I was younger and would watch anything. But yeah, for me, like comics, a big part of comics is the form of comics. So once you remove that, it really is something else. And I don't have an attachment to a lot of the characters. Like, I'll give you an example. I didn't see Star Wars until I was 18, and I enjoyed it.
Wow.
But I didn't have that childhood, like, nostalgic connection to those characters that I know a lot of people have. For me, it was like, all right, I like that movie. I liked Empire, but then whenever I don't like one, it's like, oh yeah, I'm not a diehard Star Wars fan because I didn't see it then. And comics have a little bit of that. The very first comic I bought, I was too young to drive. So I'm riding home back to my house, looking at it and seeing like the list of creators and looking at the art and thinking like, this is this is what I want to do, is draw these. And so like from that point on, every comic I ever bought was partially because there's an artist I like, or, you know, I'm trying to figure out something, you know, how to do this thing. So it was always kind of driven about like, how do I make this? How do I make a comic? More so than like Mary Jane and Peter had a fight or something, you know, like I didn't connect to the characters as much, Hulk being the one exception because he had like entered my space when I was 5 or 6, as opposed to these other characters that showed up as I'm getting older. And it was much more just figure out how to make a comic book as opposed to like, I need to know what happens to Wolverine next or something.
So when you're going into comic book store, sorry, Mav, when you're going into comic book store, you're looking at the cover. And if it interests you of the artwork, that's what you're picking off.
Yes.
Okay.
Totally. And you know, looking inside too, the cover's one thing, but then I would get mad whenever it'd be like a different cover artist and I'd open it up and it look at all like the cover.
Yeah.
Right.
Switch. But yeah, that's what it was. And you know, I would follow artists too. Like once magazines showed up and then once the internet shows up, I would know what was coming up or where an artist was going. And then it was like, yep, sign me up for that book because I like that artist and that's the next thing they're doing.
Nice. Does it bother you at all whenever the shows and movies don't follow comics that came before them?
No, because to me, like if you love the comic and the movie's different, you still have the comic. Like,
yep.
Thank you.
Right. Yes.
I get bent out of shape.
See, I don't. I'm Jim. I'm like you. Like, I don't want to go into things and be a pessimist. Like, I want to enjoy them. So whether that's a comic book or, you know, a movie, I don't look to hate them or try to find reasons to hate them like the internet does. I just want to you know, suspend my disbelief for a couple hours and enjoy that, you know.
One of the things that happens, like I teach a little bit too, and something that I hear from students all the time, like they'll be frustrated by their drawing. And I hear from people that don't even really draw, but you know, like people that are like, I can't draw anything, or this doesn't look like what I tried to draw, and they're angry and frustrated. And I always say, like, you want to be able to look at what you draw and evaluate it on its own merit. It's always going to be different than the idea that you had for it in your head, no matter how good you are at translating that idea. It's always going to be different. So you want to be able to like look at that drawing and say, all right, it's different than my original idea, but maybe it's better, you know, like judge it based on its own quality. And I kind of feel that way about the movies. You know what I mean? Like they're different than the book doesn't mean they're bad or worse. Like it's possible they're different than the book or the source material and they're better.
Yeah, it's all subjective because it's all a different form of art.
Yeah.
Right. So teaching too. So is that like college classes or like what?
Yeah, I've been teaching at the School of Visual Arts in Manhattan for almost a decade in their visual narrative MFA program. So it's a multidisciplinary program. Some of the students they want to make graphic novels or they want to make comics. Some of them are game designers. Some are documentary filmmakers, animators, photographers. It's pretty much any kind of visual storytelling.
Wow, that's awesome.
That is good. And you go up there or you do it virtual?
It's a low residency program. My classes have always been online as long as I've been part of it. So in the last couple of years, everybody caught up with me with all the online teaching.
You were
you're
a pioneer.
Yeah, it's I always half joke with the administration about how I think I learn more than the students do. Because, you know, like I'm dealing with all the students, but because it's online, a lot of the students may not see everything that their peers do, but I see everything. So in some ways, I feel like I'm actually the one who's getting the most education out of it.
So is that hard to do with draw? Like, do you have like a desk camera that you're like drawing? Like,
it has challenges, you know, like I've been meeting with students and doing online video and stuff from the very beginning. So, you know, we do have ways to interact like this. But, you know, it would probably be a little bit easier to do in a classroom where, you know, you say something once and everybody hears it as opposed to, you know, having to talk to everybody kind of in different meetings and different times. But yeah, I don't know. It's I never taught in a traditional classroom. Well, I have, but I haven't done it a lot. So it's not like I had something to compare it to. The first teaching I ever did was in this online class. So.
Okay. Gotcha. So now let's get into wrestling real quick.
Yes.
Well, you have some questions.
I mean, the name of your YouTube channel, is Jargon.
Yes.
So And how did you guys? Is everybody on your show wrestling fans?
Ed is a wrestling fan. After that, I'm not so sure. But it's mainly me and Ed. So we are both wrestling fans. I grew up, when I was a kid, I liked wrestling. As a lot of kids, very similar to comics, especially superhero comics. And that's what I had before I had comic books. And then, I don't know, at some point I kind of fell out of watching wrestling, and I got back into it as I was making comics and podcasts started. So you'd have like a bunch of ex-wrestlers or retired wrestlers telling stories.
No,
but also
they don't do
talking
that.
about craft. And I can remember like one of the big ones, I realized like they would always talk about storytelling in the matches. And I thought like, I need to learn this because I do superhero comics. So like, how do I tell a story in a fight? It's essentially what they're talking about, like, storytelling in a match. And there was an episode of Stone Cold's podcast where he broke down the match where Mankind won the championship and WWF like beat WCW in ratings and, like this huge moment. He went through watching the match and talking about it, like move by move and every detail, the way he would see it. And then somebody made a video with his commentary on top of the match. And I would watch it over and over and, like look at these little details that he would talk about how things worked. And that was really what got me back into wrestling. And then things started to get really interesting, like AEW, whenever that starts. And, you sort of had all these interesting things happening at once around wrestling at a time when wrestling wasn't its best, I don't think, at least not its most popular. But I started listening to these podcasts and, lo and behold, a lot of interesting stuff starts happening in the pro wrestling world. So it's been fun to kind of like follow along and watch all of these developments while also listening to these guys, great storytellers telling their stories.
Yeah. What podcast did you like? The wrestling podcast, your number one wrestling podcast?
I enjoyed Stone Cold's. Whenever I first started, he would often have other wrestlers on and they'd be telling stories. I listened to a lot of Jim Cornette. He's pretty good at breaking stuff down, but I listened to a wide variety. I listened to a lot of Conrad Thompson's podcasts. So like Arn Anderson's podcast is one I enjoy. They started, I would read a bunch of wrestling books also. And Arn Anderson's autobiography is written in kayfabe, which is a strange thing to read.
That's awesome.
I'm sure.
It's very entertaining. But whenever they started the Arn Anderson podcast, at first it was like any other podcast, but then they started at the beginning of his career and going through it chronologically. And it's been amazing, just kind of tracing his rise. So like he was in Mid-South when he was pretty early in his career, and he was the curtain jerker, the first match of the night. And the guy, Cowboy Bill Watts, who ran Mid-South, was very strict. He was kind of Jim Shooter-esque, in wrestling.
Yeah.
And so like his first match, you couldn't go out of the ring, you couldn't throw a punch. And so that's where Arn Anderson learned to wrestle, and he would have to go 20 minutes, and really learned his craft. And so like there've been a lot of great stories on there, but I hear stuff everywhere. Like whenever Scott Hall died, everybody, anytime a wrestler dies, then you get tributes from everybody. And, it's sad for the passing, but it's interesting to hear people kind of tell stories. And especially over a couple of weeks, you'll hear every version of a Scott Hall story. And Jeff Jarrett does a podcast and was talking about working with Scott Hall and how smart Scott Hall was. And so at the time, Razor Ramon was in WWF. They did squash matches on TV. The star would come out and it'd be one-sided and you knew who was going to win because the other guy you'd never heard of. And Scott Hall, according to Jeff Jarrett, explained to him, like, don't just beat the guy, move. Grab a hold at some point because it allows your announcers to then tell your story. So, put the guy in a headlock and let the announcer basically, tell your story to the people watching at home, who you are, who your character is, stuff like that. And so I'm really interested in those things. Like I hear a lot of wrestlers talk about what the referee does and how important the referee is in the story.
Very important. Very important.
Yeah. And so, there are all these little details. Like I've heard Cornette talk about the announcers and how, like if some big event happened, they would often schedule a kind of a boring match after that event. So the announcers could just keep talking about that event to really put it over, to really emphasize it. And, those little details are things that I would have never noticed as a kid watching. But
Yeah.
now I think about them and I think like, how do you do that in comics? You know, and maybe you do it with lettering, maybe you do it with coloring, but there are all these pieces of a comic book and it's the same deal. Like they can all work to tell the story you're trying to tell. And hopefully some of that's in Hulk Grand Design, you know, some stuff that maybe is even subtle, but,
that big Lou Ferrigno Hulk, that's right out there. That is like, I never seen that coming, and I know I said it twice in this podcast. Like I would have never thought that you incorporated a TV show into this book.
Yeah, which AEW is in Pittsburgh tonight, so hopefully we're not keeping you from that.
No, but I saw Britt Baker going through like the Steelers, Great Hall or whatever they gave her.
She was hanging out with Coach Tomlin and all that good stuff. So, it's a big deal when they come to Pittsburgh. They seem to be everywhere.
It's a great wrestling town. You know, we have quite a history here. Mankind trained here. And, Bruno Sammartino, the longtime WWE or WWF champion, is from Pittsburgh or lived in Pittsburgh most of his life. So there's a long legacy.
Kurt Angle.
Yeah.
Do you go to shows? Do you go to indie shows or big shows? Because there's a lot of indie shows.
I've been to both indie and big shows. Like I saw Britt Baker in a gymnasium of, I don't know,
IWC probably.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. So you incorporated the wrestling into your comics, into your guys' YouTube channel because you guys are fans. So two loves incorporated into everything. That's phenomenal.
So we have to ask, what are the top 5 favorite wrestlers then, Jim?
Oh man, it's gonna be tough. Roddy Piper.
Yes,
we did just become best friends. I swear.
Piper's my number one.
Yeah.
Number one.
I fell in love with Piper. I don't know. Do you ever listen to his podcast? He was podcasting the last couple years of his life.
Yes, he was.
And you could probably find them. And like, he just won me over, one, because of enthusiasm. You know, I talked about how I love that enthusiasm. Like he was like 10 all the time, at least anytime the microphone was on in front of him. But also like he would just project love. Like he'd bring these guys on, you know, and it was like, I love you, man, that kind of thing over and over. And there was just something about it. Like he had that energy of, I can't imagine him not giving 110% to whatever he tried to do. So, I really was a big fan of his.
When I met him, and he was phenomenal. I met him, and I stood in line for 2 hours to meet him.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it, and I had tears in my eyes, and his son was there, and I just wanted to let his son know that his dad was very influential on me, and that was one of the reasons why I love wrestling, actually, was
That's
the Piper's Pit.
And I bet you he was, I bet Roddy was 100% giving his 110% to everybody that came through that line.
Yeah, he did. It was awesome. I'll never forget it. Never forget it.
Okay, so what are the next 4?
Stone Cold Steve Austin was a big one for me.
So you're on a roll.
Yep.
Probably. Ric Flair, of course.
Yeah.
Man, now it gets really tough as we get into like only a couple to go, you know. I like CM Punk. I like Andre the Giant. I liked Arn Anderson. You know, there's so many guys that were just huge. So
that's awesome. You have
that's a nice mix.
Road Warriors. How can you not? You know, the Road
Right.
superhero comics. You know,
that's what I'm saying. Like back in the day with WWF, you had the Ultimate Warriors, you had the Road Warriors, you had these larger than life characters were exactly like comics. You know,
totally. And you know, even to the point now, you know, with kayfabe, like now we know all these stories, you know, Dark Side of the Ring and stuff. And it's kind of like they're alter egos, you know, like behind what we see on camera. The parallels are kind of uncanny.
Yeah, that's amazing. Because actually the three of us, I don't know if Mal was going to say, actually the three of us has actually been into business for a little bit. We dabbled a little
wrestling.
bit.
Yep.
Yeah.
All 3 of you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea.
Bubba actually ran a company out of Indiana County, and we ran shows and whatnot. But it was a fun ride, and that's kind of how Cable and I have been really good friends since elementary school. But you know, then we met Bubba through the wrestling business, and then you know we just came.
They worked for me, and they did a great job, and we did this podcast and. All the love that we have with the comic books and movies and wrestling, we incorporated into this, and the Steelers, of course, we incorporated into this podcast. And that's what intrigues me about you as an artist. And then you did you guys like the wrestling because you and Ed's brother's into wrestling. And I know him. He's a very good dude. And he's been on a couple of my shows. and it's just a small world. Like, and it just boggles my mind that comic book artists are actually wrestling fans, but it suits
Makes
the
a lot of
purpose.
sense.
Yeah, it does,
Yeah,
because of
yeah.
superheroes, the villains. You know, you got the bad guys. You know, I mean, the
Totally.
heels. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's phenomenal. How
I'm
you
always
intertwine
surprised
everything.
whenever the comic book creators aren't fans, because I
Okay.
them too, and they're just like, man, I just don't get wrestling, and it's like, dude, you draw guys rolling around in the alley, like it's the
Yeah.
same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is
That's
awesome.
awesome. Yeah.
Wow. I can't. So, yeah. Now, do you have anything? I know you're doing the Hulk now and you're promoting it and putting it out there and trying to get. Do you have another creative comic on the back burner ready to once you're
Any
ready
new
to go?
ventures ready?
I don't. I'm not sure what I'm going to do next. I took an illustration job last week, and part of the reason that I took it is it's kind of a bigger job, so it's almost like that's going to be scrubbing the Hulk out of my brain.
Oh, okay.
At least
Palette cleanser.
I'm sorry.
I said palette cleanser.
Yes, exactly.
Fresh,
yeah, exactly right. And I don't know what I'm going to do next. I have a lot of ideas, but we'll see. I'm not sure. I may do another crowdfunder for a collection of my ballpoint pen notebook drawings, which I had done. Geez, now it's been like 10 years. I did a couple of them, but it's basically a reproduction of a notebook of these drawings that I do with just like, like Bic pens.
Oh, that's awesome. Do you have any laid around that you can show us?
Yeah.
If
probably.
not, that's okay. I was just curious of what they look like. I love art, so.
I have to be careful what I pull out.
Okay.
Here's something. This is some Vince McMahon.
Oh my goodness!
Wow!
Wow!
I was just going to suggest you should do a wrestling comic next. So
Wow!
It crosses my mind, absolutely. But like, here's one for an indie comic called Acid Nun.
Oh, wow!
But it's it's all these color pens and
Acid Nun. See, I like that. I like that name, because that name is probably, I could see that on a Friday night when I'm chilling watching Netflix. Acid Nun.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Especially
that's what made me fall for it. It's a comic out of Chicago, and it's just really, like really super cool.
Damn, that Vince McMahon looked good.
yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to pitch you something here now.
Okay.
No royalties or anything if it ever takes off. It's free. Grand design.
This is the proof that you got that this is your idea, though. Right. Shut off the camera.
We'll edit it out. We'll edit it out. Grand design. Stone Cold Steve Austin.
You know what, man? That'd be sweet. One of the grand designs that I actually, because people always ask, like,
Wow.
do you have a grand design idea? And one of my ideas was NWA, because like the early days,
wow,
of
that'd be
NWA,
amazing.
there's not a lot
Wow.
of footage.
Oh my
that's
goodness!
before
Yeah.
some of that stuff was on video. So like in a way, that would make sense to me as a comic, because it'd be a chance to see some of this stuff that maybe we don't actually have video.
And you could do that with the grand design under.
Oh
This is,
wow!
from Rob Liefeld's Profit.
Oh my god.
That's amazing. Wow.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So you do these drawings. You're going to do a Kickstarter. How does that work? How does?
What I'll do is like, here's one more, and then I'll show you like what these books look like. This is Faust.
Oh wow!
The Tim Vigil comic from
That's
the 80s.
awesome.
Okay.
I shouldn't have had whenever I was like 13 or whenever I got hold of this thing.
Wow.
But I'll do them like sometimes, like this and Acid Nun were pinups for comics, and
You're
then
very
Rob
talented.
Liefeld's Profit is for a book that Rob is putting together.
Very talented, Jim. Very talented.
But I've done, I've done a couple of notebook collections. So this is actually one of the notebook collections that I've done, and it's just, it looks like a notebook, but it's the drawings.
Wow.
So like this
Holy
one, why I can't operate this camera better, but this is Ape Sapien, from Hellboy here.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I
that's
would
with
do
just
these
pen.
like gallery shows and stuff like that, and put out like these notebook reproductions as the catalogs. This one is the Matrix, and if you had
Oh my
God.
glasses, it actually works as like a 3D image, because I drew it
Wow.
with light blue and light pink, so it works.
That's amazing.
And that's all pen.
Yeah, all pen.
God,
So So, like, if somebody goes on and does the Kickstarter, would they get a whole entire notebook or just a
That's right.
drawing? So the whole notebook would, like, mine would be different than Bubba's, or
No, it
or are
would
they
be
all the
printed.
same?
It'd be reproductions.
Okay,
But I
gotcha,
would do a
gotcha.
limited run, but I have it bound like a notebook. So it's basically a reproduction of the notebook drawings. It's kind of a cool object because like everybody has drawn in a notebook or written in a
Yeah,
notebook.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
so,
it's like a portfolio of work.
yeah,
but
exactly.
yeah.
So that may be the next thing that I do like this summer if I get all caught up and have a little bit of free time, because I've been doing the drawings for, years, and I have a big pile of them, and people like the notebooks, but they've been out of print for almost a decade. So
that's-
I might do a new one.
That's
If
awesome.
you do that, you'll probably have three people first in line for that.
Yeah, no, that would be awesome.
Yeah. That is phenomenal.
No, but and then you could come back and we could talk about that.
That's true.
Right.
Gosh, I'm not very organized here. I did a lot of wrestling drawings, and then I made a wrestling zine.
I think the wrestling thing now if you ever do another grand design, is that copyrighted by Marvel?
I think
don't know the answer to that.
I think other comic companies do them. They're just not called Grand Design, right, Jim? Am I wrong there?
I don't know. It's done something quite like the Grand Designs, but I also don't know if Marvel owns that.
Okay.
A trademark on Grand Design or not. I couldn't tell you.
I think that NWA thing that you were talking about would be phenomenal.
Yeah.
And
I
know
think
the three of us.
because it doesn't exist. Like some of this stuff. WWF could do video documentary of their history, but NWA doesn't have the video for it. So in a way, like it'd be all these stories that are huge, featuring giant wrestling stars in history, but we don't have the video. So a comic would be a good way to represent that.
You'll have to watch a lot of video
or you can contact Ric Flair or an Arn Anderson or whoever.
Yes.
And you could do their career alone even. And trust me, Flair would be all about that.
Yeah, he would be.
There've been a few of those. There've been comics based on people. Like Jim Cornette released one, I think, through IDW.
Oh,
I think
okay.
Arn Anderson is doing one that will be either kickstarted or some kind of crowdfunder. Those things are happening.
Are those like an autobiographical type comic, or are those like a more fantastical type of just fun comic?
I think they're both. I think Jim Cornette's was a collection of like several old comics history stories. So like Sputnik Monroe, I think, was in one of them.
Oh, geez, I
can't even remember what the other ones were, but it was like 3 or 4 stories, that he basically told the story and then somebody made a comic of it.
Okay.
I don't know what Arn Anderson's is. I just remember hearing that he was working on one with somebody. So I don't know. Weird stuff comes through my
but that would be since you cleanse your palate, and then later on that would definitely be something, because like you said, the wrestling around here is a very hot spot, so you could set up in any venue and you're booking the boys would appreciate that, because all the boys in wrestling would probably buy a copy. Me being all three of us being in the boys in the business, we would definitely I would buy a copy, and I know these two would too,
for sure.
Jerry the King Lawler is a really good artist.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. I've seen that. Yeah.
Into wrestling because he had sent drawings of like like the previous week's finishes or whatever to Jerry Jarrett, and he saw them. Or actually not Jerry Jarrett, whoever the announcer,
Lance Russell
saw them and put them on the air. And that was like Jerry Lawler's first, on a wrestling show kind of appearance when he was, I don't know, 12 or 14 or something with these drawings. But there have been wrestling comics that he has painted covers for, like indie comics, because he's really good. If you ever see his artwork, it's like, he's very, very good.
I think he did some of the Headlock stuff.
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Yeah. Did you read any of that?
I didn't. I don't know that I've ever seen one of those in person, although I do. People will send us wrestling comics because they know I like them. I call it my box of gimmicks, but it's all wrestling.
That's awesome.
That's great.
But Jim, we don't want to take up too much of your time here. We really appreciate this, but I want to ask a question I ask everybody that comes on this podcast, whether you're a wrestler, an artist, or anything, all walks of life. Jim, what would you most want to be known for?
Oh man, definitely my comics. The comics that I make. That's what I've spent my life, most of my life doing. So certainly my comics.
Okay. Well, you definitely leave an impression for sure. Any plugs? Anything you're working on? Any plugs you want to plug? Now's the time for that.
Hulk Grand Design.
Yeah.
Madness is coming to stores the last Wednesday in April, so that'll be out. I'm not sure when this show goes up, but that'll be out within a week. And Cartoonist Kayfabe on YouTube. If you love comics, check it out. We put up new episodes every day and cover just tons of comics, interviews with creators, comic books, comic art, tutorials. You know, it's just us talking comics and comics history and everything we can think of comics related.
Awesome. Thank you so much,
man.
Jim. It has been an honor.
Jim,
No
thank
idea.
you so much. The little kid in me, I'm telling you, when I get off here, I'm gonna be like pumped up. I'm gonna go Hulkified here. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure meeting you in Phantom of the Attic. It was a pleasure for you to autograph my book. It was a pleasure for you to be on a Triple B experience, and I duly mean that. I really truly do. And you can come on anytime if you want to
Please.
ever plug anything. Get a hold of us, and it was an honor. And I wish you all the best. And issue number 2, I'm going out, and I will definitely be purchasing more than just one, Jim. So I thank you. I thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much, man. This has been great.
And use this podcast as an outlet. Anything you need, you let us know, and we'll put it on. So
Sounds
we appreciate
good. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Alrighty.
It was
Thanks,
awesome
Jim.
to meet you.